thanks a lot for for giving this opportunity, particularly the organizers for this meeting and Dr. Damle. It's good to see some familiar faces. Professor Deepak Ramji is there, our Cardiff connection, and it's nice to meet always with people whom you know from your long time. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So the topic that I have chosen today for is immune modulators, good or bad during pandemic. And the reason for that I chose this topic is, this is a data that is coming from Google Trends. You can see that how the term immunity booster has spiked since the pandemic has hit, and you can see that India is the epic center for that search engines, for the keyword search. Everybody was looking for how can I increase my immunity so that I don't get the COVID or Corona. That's the logic behind it, and which is natural. Like I don't think it is anything wrong in doing this search, because everybody wants to safeguard themselves and their families, loved ones, and so on. So they thought, is there any way, when the world had no clue how to protect themselves, is there any way we can protect myself by increasing the immunity? The good thing is they all knew that, if they have immunity, if they increase the immunity, they can get protected. That's half the education is already done there, I think, for the general public. So I think this really prompted me to look into, what is this, why people are so, curious about this, and supporting this is a lot of products that came into the market in the last 1 year. I can say that, almost every day you will see a lot of things. I'm sure all of you must have seen these sort of things in the news and in the newspaper and various social media, saying that this does this and so on. So I thought maybe we need to look into it. Is this really good to take an immunity booster during pandemic? And that prompted the title for this talk. So just to give you the questions that we want to address here is, do these products really modulate immunity? Whether we have any answers to this, let's find out. And is it wise to modulate immunity during COVID pandemic? And that's the sort of questions that we will try to address. And in order to address this, we need to ask these questions. What is immunity? And given that this is a fairly different set of audience who's not specialized in immunology, I thought it would be good to cover some of these basic aspects, and also ask the question whether can immunity be modulated, and what really happens during COVID in terms of immune response, and then the pros and cons of modulating the immune response during COVID, and can nutraceuticals or phytoproducts modulate immune response? So these are the questions that we will try to address in the next 30 minutes or so. Do I have 30 minutes? I just want to check.
Yes, sir. You have 30 minutes.
Thank you. So what is immunity? I think, again, there are different sets of definitions. This is something which I found it to be appropriate. Immunity can be defined as a complex biological system endowed with the capacity to recognize and tolerate whatever belongs to the self, and to recognize and reject what is foreign, which is non-self. This is, again, a textbook's definition of immunity. And what really we are talking when we talk about immunity is it's a complex system of cells. Like, there are two arms. One is called the innate immunity, one is called the adaptive immunity, and you can see that and they also bridge. There are two arms, as I said. One is the innate and the adaptive immunity, and then within the adaptive immunity there are different lineage of cells that comes and plays a role at different stages. I'm not going into the details, but all I want to know for you to draw your attention is to these CD4 cells, CD8 T cells, and the B cells. These are the ones that play a critical role during viral infections, and all vaccines that we are currently aiming to take or trying to develop is all towards these cells. So this is something which we need to keep in mind, so that I will come into when we talk about whether it is worth having these immunity boosters, good or bad. We will go into that. Okay, so again, cell-mediated immunity, which is your the two components that I talked about, which is your T cells and B cells. The first thing that we need to understand is both of them requires an exposure to the antigen. That is, means, unless you get an antigen exposed, you can't have immunity, whether it is B cells or T cells. And basically, what happens is, this is how the mechanism works. The antigen presenting cell takes the antigen, and then it presents it to the T cells, and then it elicits a B cell response, which then goes on to produce antibodies. And that is what we are currently measuring in COVID, positive people, whether they have got IgG, then you can say that they have got, exposed to the viral infection, and then they have got an immunity against it. On the other side, we have T cells. Again, similar process. The T cells are, the antigen presenting cells takes up the viral antigen, and it goes and presents it, and then the naive T cells, which carries the T cell receptor for the viral peptides, gets activated, and then they go on to differentiate, and then they further differentiate into T helper cells, cytotoxic T cells, and then that's how they go and kill the virally infected cells. These are the two, and both these mechanisms requires prior antigen. And without the prior antigen, the question that we need to ask when we are trying to take immunity boosters is, where is this immunity coming from for your body? Okay. So again, acquired immunity, this is called the acquired immunity, which is lifelong, and when you have this acquired immunity through the antigen exposure, it causes an immunological memory, and it protects you throughout your life. And it can be an active immunity, which you get it through an infection, or a passive immunity where you get this through vaccination or through the mother's feed and so on. So this is short term, but it gives you still protection. And this is where the convalescent serum therapy or the plasma therapy comes in, where antibodies from an infected person will help you to recover from an infection. So it is a short-lived support system. So the point that I want to make is, immunity is not something a linear scale. You over a period of time, I take today something, and then the next day something, your immunity is going to increase. It doesn't work like that. Rather, immunity is a complex system. It is a fine balance between the various parameters. When it exceeds that, you end up in getting an autoimmune diseases or allergic sort of conditions. When it falls below a threshold, it causes you infection and cancer. So in summary, I can say that immune functions vary between subjects and fluctuate over time within a subject. In healthy population, these fluctuations define the boundaries of a normal range and immune functions, providing optimal health. And genetic makeup, past experience, contribute to the differences between the subjects, and of course environmental, lifestyle, all this play a role in how your immunity or the immune system works in your body. Again, as I said, it is not a linear scale. It's rather a fine balance between various parameters, so that your immune system is at an optimal health. It doesn't go above a certain level to cause autoimmune diseases, or it goes below a certain level where you become more susceptible to infection and cancer and other conditions. So that's a sort of overview, about how the immunity works. So can immunity be modulated? That's the question then. Can this be modulated in any way? Yes, there are instances where immunity has been shown to be modulated, because some of the parameters by which we measure immunity is the cytokines that play an important role in augmenting these immune responses. And this is an example of an animal study where you can see an animal which is left freely to move, which is the no stress condition. There is no increase in the TNF alpha levels in their circulation. Whereas when you put the same animal into a bathtub, and then you made them to swim, the stress causes an increase in the cytokine levels. And then when you restrain them in their hands, again, it increases the cytokine level. So this really tells you, even stress can modulate your immunity. So it is important to keep that in mind, that when we are talking about Ayurveda or holistic health, not to get stressed and do things that will take away, de-stress you. So again, IL-2, not as prominent as TNF alpha, but very similar trends you can see. And this is yoga also, shown to be, influencing immunity. And you can see that, the gray line is people who are highly practicing in the yoga. The blue line is people who are low practice frequency, and the yellow line is the no practice at all. And at some point, they all had similar levels of cytokines. And as they started practicing yoga, you can see that very similar trend between IL-6, TNF-alpha, IL-1 beta. They are all pro-inflammatory cytokines. You can see that it goes down. It is not like when you do yoga, these cytokines doesn't go up, rather it goes down. So it is, what it means is like, just because you have high level of cytokines does not mean that you have heightened immunity, rather you have optimal immunity. So that's what we need to note here. And again, this is another conditions. This is again in the allopathic medicine. You can see that cancer is being targeted by looking at targets that are known to play a critical role in organizing the immune response. So these are all various targets that are currently. I'm just citing this as an example that immunity can be modulated, but you need to have good scientific understanding about how this whole immune system works. I'm not going into the details of this slide. In the interest of time. And this is again another condition, which is autoimmune diseases, and there are several targets that are currently being explored. The cartoon on the left-hand side talks about the various targets that are currently in clinical trials targeting various immune modulators or immune mediators, and they are all in current clinical trials. So on the right-hand side, you see a product. In fact, this is from Etrimet Pharma, and this is currently used for psoriasis. And I'm not going into the details of how this works, but all they know I can tell is that it blocks IL-17, which is a key mediator of inflammation in psoriatic conditions. So again, these sort of bringing the understanding the Ayurveda, how it works through the modern day science is the future, I believe, and this is something which I think will evolve more in the coming years. More and more information probably will emerge from the Ayurvedic approaches from a scientific point of view. So that is the future, I believe. So far, I think I can tell you that immunity can be modulated for optimal health, and however we need a sound understanding on the immunobiology of the disease condition, and we need strong scientific evidence on its immune modulatory function. I think this is an area that I think definitely we all can, me being a scientist, trying to understand the immunology of various things. I'm also very much interested in understanding or providing our know-how to understand how various Ayurvedic drugs or products can works, so that we have a scientific basis for their functional efficacy. So just to go into the next item, what happens during immune response in COVID, and is there a good or bad to modulate immune response? Although we don't know whether these products do modulate the immune response, because there is literally very minimal scientific evidence for all this, but just to understand how it works. So what happens during COVID is when you get exposed to the virus in your lungs, your antigen presenting cells takes up the generally the lung acts as a sentinel for various things, and the moment it sees a new virus, it triggers an immune response. It captures the virus and it goes to the draining lymph node, and then in the draining lymph node, it primes the T cells to elicit an immune response, and then those T cells comes to the lung, and then it acts on the cells that have been infected with the virus in an effort to clear the virus. In this process, what happens is, for the T cells to be functional, it has to have a lot of cytokines produced to be to be functional. So this is where the cytokine storm kicks in, and generally there is a heightened immune response is probably the reasons for the severe immunopathology that we see in COVID conditions, and so under these conditions, most of the approaches that currently being practiced is either to minimize the immune response so that the immunopathology is minimized. So that has been the general approach or the treatment that has been used for COVID management. So under these conditions, if we end up taking an immune modulator, or if it is an immunity booster, or even in any way, if it is influencing the immune response, then it is going to be a challenge. Or if it increases the immunopathology of the disease, then it's a problem. So we need to little bit cautious in taking these products, is my personal view. Without having a clear understanding what these immunity boosters does, it's a little risky. So this is again an example of how people have used some of the targets that are used, some of the targets that are available for modulating the immune response. Anti-CD6 is a antibody that is currently used for psoriasis and other conditions. And this is a product that is coming from India, that is Biocon, and they explored whether it works better in COVID, particularly if anti-CD6 has been given to COVID patients, whether their inflammatory response is reduced. And they showed that, there is, by blocking anti-CD6, using anti-CD6, they blocked anti-CD6, and then their inflammatory response has been reduced, and it had a huge clinical significance in bringing down the COVID-related complications. So basically, when you have a heightened immune response during COVID, if you block anti-CD6, it brings down the inflammatory response as the cytokine storm. So which seems to be having some therapeutic indication. So, as I said before, existing treatment strategies suggest that blocking the pro-inflammatory response helps in the recovery of COVID patients. So under these conditions, if you are taking unwarranted immunity boosters without medical supervision, it could be dangerous during COVID. I think that's the message that I wanted to convey. So be careful when you are taking any sort of immunity boosters, because it could have an harmful effect on you. So the next question is, can nutraceuticals and phytoproducts modulate immune response? I think this group probably strongly believes in this. I think I'm not surprised. And this is again, some of the examples that I could bring it from the published literature. This is not a work that I have done. I could say that, these are the cells of the immune systems, the key cells of the immune system, and the cells on the left hand side are the innate cells, whereas on the right hand side is the adaptive cells. And you can see that I just want to draw your attention to the to the arrow marks that says EG, which is a green tea, and you can see that the green tea brings down the recruitment of neutrophils. And if you look at, again, monocytes and macrophages, it again plays a role in bringing down the chemotaxis and so on, and seems to have a lot of influence on various immune functions. Similarly, on the T cell sides, you can see that, it increases the proliferation. So generally, green tea is recommended for people to take and boost the immunity and so on. So you can see that, here it brings down the proliferation of T cells and interferon gamma, and various functional aspects have been described for green tea. So again, these are all coming from scientific evidence that has been published in papers and so on. So this is how generally, people could go and develop or look for scientific evidence for the products or they are currently developing in an Ayurvedic setup. So, this is again another study. I'm just I'm not going into the details, but you can clearly see that there is a lot of evidence to show that various phytoproducts have shown to block or modulate immune response in various disease conditions or in their ex vivo lab conditions and so on. Again, this is something to look into. There are many scientific methods that are currently available if you are looking at studying the efficacy of your products or approaches. And this is, I think, most probably all of you know, this is a golden, nutraceutical curcumin, multi-targeting for multiple chronic diseases, and the history, it's one of the product that is very much upstream currently, where you can see that in vitro studies have been done, in vivo studies or clinical trials are going, and then you can see that they have shown to multiple chronic diseases like anti-inflammatory diseases, neurological diseases, urogenetical malignant diseases in multiple places. But then again, it hasn't reached whatever the studies or the initial studies have shown the significance, it doesn't really come out in the clinical trials that strongly, and people are currently working on this. And again, this is a potential wonder drug that we may have, or there are modified curcumins are also available. So, and again, there are some systematic approaches that are available. This is from International Life Sciences Institute. This is a methods paper which tells you, if you have a product, if you want to understand, how a product or our nutritional product or a phyto product's efficacy has to be studied. This guidelines gives you an understanding of how to go about it. So this is again another piece of information that you can look for. Basically, the report provides guidance on methodological and technical considerations for your study, the criteria to select various immune function markers, selection and prioritization of markers, clustering of markers according to the clinical relevance and the involvement of immune functions, and scenarios to interpret changes. There is this biomarkers that you need to look into. So overall, it's a very complex study, but then once you try to understand that, it gives you a clear idea about, if you have a product and I want to understand what sort of immune function it has, it gives you a stepwise guidance on how to go about it. So in summary, I think what I have tried to show is immunity is provided by a complex biological system operating on a non-linear scale. Immunity can be modulated for therapeutic purposes. There are enough evidences for that. I think I've talked about some of them in the Ayurvedic and stress conditions and cancer and autoimmune conditions. And then modulation of immunity does not mean increasing immune parameters activity, rather keeping it optimal. That's another important thing that we need to keep in mind. Just modulating means it's not increasing it to a heightened level or anything like that. It's just keeping it at the right threshold. COVID causes severe immunopathology, and blocking pro-inflammatory response is beneficial in the management of patients. So it is important to note that under these conditions, if you immunity boosters increases your immunity, then it's a challenge. Okay, or influences the immunity in the wrong direction, I mean. Then nutraceuticals and phyto products show potential for immune modulation, but lacks scientific data to back their claim. Again, there's a lot that is there, but there are minimal evidence is available, is what I'm trying to say. And then taking unwarranted immunity boosters without medical supervision could be dangerous during COVID. So just be cautious, when you are taking these immunity boosters. So the next part, or the last part of the talk, is something which we have been working on, a simple test to measure cellular immunity. So as I initially spoken, there are two arms of the immunity, the humoral arm and the cellular immunity arm. Most of the diagnostic tests currently available is focused on the IgG, which is the humoral arm. Currently, nothing is available on the cell-mediated immunity side. So we have been trying to develop something here to where we can take a blood and then stimulate it with some antigens against the COVID, and then look at some biomarkers, and then using that look at broad spectrum of biomarkers, and then from that we have identified a couple of biomarkers, and out of which we are looking at one of the biomarker. I'm not going into the details of the biomarker because of confidentiality issues. So what we know is, when we looked at this biomarker in COVID people, and this is there are three sets of groups: people who have been PCR positive, which is they have COVID positive, and then people who have had COVID and they are known to have their antibody response, and there is also a set of people who have had COVID, but their antibody response was not that strong. So when we looked at in all these patients, what we could see is, here you can see that the biomarker, the particular biomarker we are having, you can see that they're all elevated again a certain level. And here, out of 15 patients, all 15 people who are COVID positive, this biomarker was elevated. And then in the 85%, in the people who have been antibody positive, around 85% of the people had a heightened biomarker level. And then in people who have been having antibody negative, the levels were like, nearly 25% only were positive. So basically we think that like, we could use this as a potential biomarker for understanding the cellular immunity. And this is something which is an ongoing work. I'm not going into the too much of details of it as it is still under developmental stage. So with that, like, I would like to stop here, and if there are any questions on the immunology side, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Shri Baalasubramanian. It was great lecture within a brief time. I have one question. Your kit, can it be used for understanding the efficacy of Ayurvedic drugs, that is before and after, whether this certain type of immunity which is desired is going up?
So you mean you are talking about the last thing that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, see, if your product or if your particular thing is you think has an influence on the immune response, if you introduce that into this test, when we do, it should have an influence on the readout, and that can be used as a measure to see whether your product is modulating the immunity either positively or negatively, in whatever this biomarker. Although it is a very simplistic view of telling it, but we need to understand, more broader biomarkers and so on. But that all is possible.
Okay, then does it also mean that your kit can tell us whether 98% there is mortality is less than 2%, 87% were asymptomatic? Probably they had better, some of these markers far better. That's why they survived. Is it your view?
Sorry, come again. Can you repeat that question?
87% of COVID positive in India were asymptomatic. Mortality rate is less than 2%. And could it be, is it possible for us to make a guess with your kit that these guys are likely to have, be asymptomatic or lesser, mild to moderate compared to others?
Yeah, possible, because there could be, we also see that it is possible that some of these people could have some sort of cross-protective immunity because of the conditions and so on. So it is possible that, like, the mortality rates in India could be because we may have some cross-protective immunity. And again, it needs a more systematic approach, and that's something which we'll be doing in a different conditions. And I'm not bringing some of those data today here.
Yeah. But also that means you will also be able to say whether vaccinated people are truly protected or not truly protected.
Yeah, I think that is definitely possible. That's definitely possible. We can measure both the humoral response and T cell response. What's the level of what sort of immunity that the vaccination has generated in those people, because it is possible some people after getting the vaccination, they may not even generate an immunity against the COVID. And already, I think today I had a report that has come out saying that two couples, doctor couples in fact, who got vaccinated ended up having COVID.
Oh yeah, I mean, vaccine is likely to give you 50 to 60% of protection. So over a period of 1 or 2 years, it may be all the more significant to test the immunity.
Absolutely.
Okay,
this is where I feel this particular test that we have has the potential. It could either used as some tool to monitor people over a period of time, particularly the healthcare workers who are more going to be vulnerable. So it definitely has a role to play there.
So you also mentioned about cancer. When some immune response is not proper, then there can be cancer. Can you come show some more light about it?
Okay, so I think what maybe I'll go back to that. I think in the interest of time, I skipped those slides without spending too much time on it, but I can go back and talk about it. So these are this is basically a cancer cell and T cells. What happens is the ligands that are expressed on the cancer cell goes and blocks the T cells from functioning. So that's what generally happens in cancer, and this is where the cancer therapy is being targeted. So when you block this molecule and you stop this interaction, these T T cells become super functional, and then they go and kill those cancer cells. So this sort of approach is being targeted on PD-1, CTLA-4s, and so on. So that's the sort of approach that is currently happening right now. And generally, you know, that is immune checkpoint inhibitors are the one that are being targeted now. And there is a lot of molecules under clinical trial now. And maybe if you want, you're looking for any specific things, I can go into further detail on that.
No. I was just telling when you didn't take the name immune checkpoint. So probably you can also study the immune checkpoints of phytomolecules, whether they bring it up or bring it down. I think you can do a study on those.
I think, you know, if somebody says that, like, you know, we have a target or a phyto target and that goes and blocks or block this interaction, then there is definitely a case to study these these functions, and then see whether those phyto targets blocks and increases the functional aspect of these T cells, which eventually will end up in again, end up in clearing the cancer. Also, not only that, even as a general wellness, when you have these phyto products available and can be used for as a wellness product, then, you know, it will keep these T cells more functional, probably.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are any other questions, moderators, you can take over.
Sir, one question is there.
Yeah.
Sir, there is any difference between immunomodulation and immunobooster? Is this same, or?
I think it's a very, you know, confusing term that is currently in the market. Immunity boosters, as I said, like, you know, it's not like, you know, you can't keep on boosting your immune response. So that is not possible. So it's more, having an optimal immune response is the better way to put it, and rather than claiming it to be immunity boosters, if you can say that immune optimizers, that will be a right term.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I would like to just share. Thanks for that wonderful talk. You know, I just want to sort of make just a couple of points that obviously, you know, there's no doubt about a strong immunity. In fact, sort of being protective. In fact, at least against the adverse effects of coronavirus. Of course, the younger sort of population, of course, India has got quite a young generation. In fact, is well protected. But even in fact, you know, if you talk about sort of the more elderly, clearly those in fact with vitamin D status, right? Good vitamin D status, which is actually quite an important immunomodulator, have a protection. There's been a sort of publication coming out last week on statins, right? And in fact, individuals who are on statins, in fact, have been protected as well. And of course, statins, apart from lowering cholesterol level, has all these pleiotropic effects, like it actually dampens inflammation. And of course, dexamethasone was extremely successful. In fact, in UK, it's actually started from a sort of a hospital in Bradford. And dexamethasone, we know for 100 years, in fact, for its anti-inflammatory actions. The problem, and you quite rightly point out, with these immune boosters on the market, is that we don't know how they work. You know, we don't know anything about their pharmacokinetics. And worse, in fact, we don't know the reaction, right? Which is, it's going to with the pharmaceuticals that individuals are taking, in fact. So if you take, for example, India, we've got a large proportion of diabetics, right, who are already on pharmaceuticals, who actually take these boosters. In fact, it could actually sort of have an adverse sort of reaction, in fact, with those pharmaceutical agents, in fact, and may turn out to be worse, right? And one of the agents, curcumin, that you mentioned, obviously, you know, bioavailability is so poor, right, that you'll have to take a huge amount, in fact, to actually boost your immunity. So I think that's an important message, in fact, to go out there, that there are all these things in the market where people are trying to get into your money, but really, in fact, there's very little science behind it, and that's so important.
Absolutely, Dr. Deepak. I think, you know, I totally agree with you. I think there is a lot. Dexamethasone, the first thing when I heard about that clinical trial, that's the small clinical trial that happened in the Bradford Hospital, was amazed, because one of the probably the cheapest or the most economical drug that one can have and cure it. And I don't know what really happened to that study, whether they did a more large scale study to establish more, or I really don't know what happened.
It's actually being utilized quite a lot, in fact, and there are actually sort of more large-scale studies actually coming along. But it's as an example of a drug which has been around for sort of yonks, in fact, and we know the science behind it so well, right? And how effective, and it's cheap as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
you.